The year is 1933. The Nazis have just seized power. Hitler and his party are spreading their pure race ideology. In the next 3 years, the Nazi regime would go on to pass anti-Jewish laws, which orchestrated a nationwide pogrom in November 1938. By 1945, the Nazis had killed 6 million Jews. Yet German Nazis did not start this hatred, which makes you wonder, how did anti-Semitism all begin? Why have Jews been historically targeted, and why does it prevail today? In this series, we will ransack the pages of history to find out why. Discrimination against Jews dates back to the biblical times. Abraham led his family to Canaan almost 1,000 years before the Common Era. During this era, the early Jewish people experienced persecution because they refused to adopt the religion of the people they lived amongst. This refusal to worship idols was seen as stubborn and was resented, and formed the basis of discrimination against Jews. Fast forward to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire's culture was premised on idol, pagan worship, and belief in several gods and forces. The Jewish culture, on the other hand, was monotheistic. Like today, they observed Sabbath and circumcised their boys. These different customs only bred suspicion from the Romans, and many famous Romans wrote anti-Semitic tropes against the Jews. The lawyer Cicero, for example, allegedly did not like Jews owing to their togetherness and lack of affiliation. The Emperor Hadrian pacified Jewish lands and expelled hundreds of thousands of Jews from Jerusalem. He even destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem and banned Jews from setting foot into Jerusalem. But it was during the advent of Christianity that discrimination against Jews really took off. The Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity the primary religion of the empire. After this, Rome codified its laws and culture to align with Christianity. Many Romish festivals were converted into the new religion. The Roman Saturnalia, for example, became Christmas. As Christianity increased in influence, the early church fathers sought to establish Christianity as the successor to Judaism. It is at this juncture that persecution against Jews became capital. The refusal of Jews to accept Jesus as the Messiah was viewed as a threat to the Roman rulers and to Christianity. While it was Romans that crucified Jesus, Jews were accused of this crime. Since both religions came from the Old Testament, Christians sought to establish the validity of their new religion by claiming that it superseded Judaism. In the next several centuries, anti-Semitism became worse. By the Middle Ages, the Jews were now deemed as second-class citizens. Some of the worst discrimination against Jews occurred during this period. For example, Jews were forbidden to marry Christians, could not appear as witnesses against Christians, nor were they allowed to hold positions in government. Strange rumors concerning Jews came into fashion. It was, for instance, alleged that Jews engaged in blood libel. Blood libel were allegedly Jewish communities' religious rituals that used the blood of Christian children. Jews were further accused of having horns and tails. Such delusional views, promoted by the idle and bigoted, set the stage for renewed persecution against Jews. During the Crusades, pogroms were quite common. As the crusading mobs swept through Europe, they regularly sought out Jewish communities and meted tortures, looting, massacres, and every species of wickedness against them. By the 14th century, it seemed that Jews were the cause of everything evil that affected Europe. As the bubonic plague swept across the continent, for example, it was blamed on Jews. Jews became a convenient scapegoat because of the myths and stereotypes that were already believed about them. Though Jews were also dying from the plague, they were accused of poisoning wells and spreading the disease. In Germany and Austria alone, it is estimated that over 100,000 Jews were burned alive for this and other false accusations, including using the blood of Christian boys to make Passover matzot. In the 1500s, Martin Luther wrote a pamphlet that claimed that Jews thirsted for Christian blood. Luther thus urged Christians to slay Jews. In 1935, this pamphlet was again reprinted by the Nazis and formed the basis of the many anti-Jewish laws. Luther's remarks signaled the transition from anti-Judaism, which were basically attacks motivated by the Jews' refusal to accept Christianity, to anti-Semitism, which is hatred of Jews as a so-called race that would contaminate the purity of another race. Increasingly, Jews were subjected to political, economic, and social persecution, resulting in the deprivation of their legal and civil rights. They were restricted to living in ghettos and even required to wear markers, such as hats or badges, that made it easy to identify them. Since Jews were not allowed to own land, and the church did not allow Christians to loan money for profit, Jews had few alternatives but to become money lenders. Once they became associated with the forbidden trade of usury, which was the practice of lending money and charging high interest, a new set of stereotypes evolved around the Jews as money-hungry and greedy. As moneylenders, Jews were frequently useful to rulers who used their capital to build cathedrals and prop armies. As long as the Jews benefited the ruler, either through finance or by serving as convenient scapegoats, they were tolerated. When it suited the ruler, they were expelled. In 1290, for instance, Jews were expelled from England. In France, the authorities ordered their removal from the country in 1394. Many migrated to Poland, Austria, Hungary, and as far as Ukraine and Russia. In Spain, Jews were expelled in 1492. By the 1800s, it was quite normal to utter anti-Semitic tropes without much scruple. Terms such as the wandering Jew were synonymous with evil and the devil. In 1873, the term anti-Semitism was coined by Wilhelm Marr. Marr, a German political agitator, published an article titled "Victory of Judaism over Germanism." His thesis was that Jews were conspiring to ruin the state and should be excluded from citizenship. In Russia, Tsarist secret police published a forged collection of documents that became known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It told of a secret plot by rabbis to take over the world. Racism and anti-Semitism were also facilitated by the development of social Darwinism and pseudo-scientific notions based on theories of racial superiority and inferiority. In 1894, Alfred Dreyfus, a Jew who was a captain in the French army, was falsely accused and convicted of selling military secrets to the Germans. When evidence was discovered that Dreyfus was innocent, it was quickly covered up by French officers of the General Staff who wanted to blame the crime on a Jew. Although Dreyfus was eventually vindicated, the Dreyfus Affair, as it became known, showed how deep-rooted and pervasive anti-Semitism was in France. In Russia, while most Jews were extremely poor, they were blamed for all the problems of the Russian peasantry. Pogroms were instigated by the Tsarist secret police. In 1905, Russia's loss in the Russo-Japanese War moved the government to incite a bloody pogrom in Kishinev. Between 1917 and 1921, after the Russian Revolution, more than 500 Jewish communities in the Ukraine were wiped out in pogroms. About 60,000 Jewish men, women, and children were murdered. It has often been a thing of wonder why anti-Semitic behavior turned into the genocide of the Jewish community in Germany rather than in France or England or Russia, has all had a tradition of anti-Semitism. The answer to this question may be traced to the First World War. Following World War I, Germany was a deeply troubled country. Having lost the war, its citizens felt humiliated by the defeat. The victorious countries, including the United States, France, and England, authored the Treaty of Versailles, a peace treaty which compelled Germany to give up territory and to pay reparations to countries whose lands it had damaged. Adolf Hitler was a demagogic leader, and obedience to authority was a strong cultural norm. Hitler called upon remembered myths of the blood libel from the Middle Ages to evoke fear that the Jews would contaminate what he referred to as the superior Aryan race. Therefore, according to Hitler's doctrine, it was necessary that all Jews and their genetic pool be eliminated. This culminated in the Holocaust. There may be no more succinct description of the Holocaust than the statement issued by the Vatican on March 12, 1998. It read, "This century has witnessed an unspeakable tragedy, which can never be forgotten. The attempt by the Nazi regime to exterminate the Jewish people with the consequent killing of millions of Jews. Women and men, old and young, children and infants, for the sole reason of their Jewish origin, were persecuted and deported. Some were killed immediately, while others were degraded, ill-treated, tortured, and utterly robbed of their human dignity, and then murdered. Very few of those who entered the concentration camps survived, and those who did remained scarred for life. After the Holocaust, anti-Semitism became far less accepted. Seeing what anti-Semitism could lead to made peoples and nations ashamed of openly expressing anti-Semitism. In the case of the Catholic Church, it would eventually lead to real change, when in the 1960s, the Church removed the historic and dangerous charge against the Jewish people of being responsible for the death of Jesus. Even with this advances, anti-Semitism did not completely disappear, but the events of World War II significantly inhibited its expression. As the decades passed, as memories faded, and criticism of the Jewish state of Israel mounted, many of these inhibitions have weakened. In recent years, there has been a concerning upsurge of anti-Semitism around the world. Some is directly connected to Israel, accusing it of age-old anti-Semitic charges, such as blood libels and using evil power to control the world. Some manifestations of anti-Semitism have been more indirect. The excessive criticism of Israel leads some people to feel more comfortable attacking Jews and Jewish institutions around the world. For example, during the current war in Gaza, there has been countless anti-Semitic incidents in the United States and Europe as masses condemn Israel for its action against Hamas. Traditional expression of anti-Semitism has also seen an upsurge. A recent ADL polls, for example, showed that large numbers of Europeans believed that their Jewish citizens were not loyal to the countries in which they live. These polls also indicated that people believed that Jews had a disproportionate amount of political and economic power. In the US, anti-Semitic tropes have also seen an uptick among white supremacists, conspiracy theorists, celebrities, and common folks. Kanye West, for example, stated, and I quote, "I'm a bit sleepy tonight, but when I wake up, I'm going DEFCON 3 on Jewish people." This resurgence of anti-Semitism is a great concern, especially as we move further and further away from the lessons of the Holocaust. The Jewish people do have allies in the United States and around the world. The Church is a staunch defender of Israel. It remembers the lessons of history and is ready to stand against this very old and sinister hatred. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this brief history of the origin of anti-Semitism as much as I did. If you found value in this video, kindly consider subscribing to the channel, sharing it with your friends, or leaving a comment or a question. Until next time, do have a lovely week.